Chapter 23, verses 1 through 100. 1. Truly, at all times, you human beings of Earth have searched for something that extends far beyond what you call your material well-being, something that is the truthfully truth, and that can be called reality. 2. You see this reality as a timeless state, as something that cannot be affected in any kind and wise through any circumstances, and therefore also not through your human thoughts and feelings, or through your depravity. 3. This reality is the truthfulness of the creation with its uncontrovertible laws and recommendations which you, human beings of Earth, raise up to a Godhead in your unintellect, to which you pray and supplicate, without ever receiving a sign from it that it is responding to the supplicating, begging, and praying. Although this is hardly surprising, because the Godhead is of course only fantastically thought up and invented, but is in every respect completely powerless and without might to do any things in the good or evil. For continuously, since time immemorial, you have asked what it is that stands mightily over you and is the wellspring of all existence and being, and is called creation. 5. And you ask yourselves whether there is actually any sense to the life because you are looking at the dignityless chaos of your life. All the evil, the murdering and jealousy, the coarsenesses and torturing, the hatred in manifold forms, the crimes and criminality, all the terrorism as well as the splittings, different forms of opinions, views, etc., proceeding out of the ideologies, religions, sects and philosophies, and out of the politics of all nations which are continuously growing and apparently never cease. 6. And truly, it is understandable that you ask yourselves in deep disappointment what you shall do against it. What in truth is that which you call life, and whether this really goes beyond that which you call God. 7. The truth is that no such Godhead exists, because that to which you pray and supplicate as God is only a fantasy form invented through you human beings which cannot help you in any wise. 8. The truth is, namely, that only the creation stands over you, and you are integrated into its laws and recommendations and into its effects. 9. However, neither the creation nor its laws and recommendations determine what you have to do and not do, because that is left up to you through your will according to which you can determine and act as you wish. 10. It is therefore through your free will that you determine all and everything with regard to your life conduct and your destiny, with no determinations whatsoever influencing you on the part of the creation or on the part of its laws and recommendations. 11. Therefore, if you care for your thoughts and feelings and act according to your ideas and motivations, then this is done through your own responsibility, which you alone must bear, without any involvement through the creation or its laws and recommendations. 12. The only thing which comes forth out of the creational laws and recommendations are its effects which regulate that from out of a distinct cause of thereout resulting effect arises. 13. And if you therefore ask what you can do for your life and against all the evil world happenings through which you are disappointed, then the answer is found in that you must strive as individuals in every wise to achieve in yourselves true love as well as peace, freedom, and harmony in order to carry these high values forth amongst your fellow human beings and throughout the whole world. 14. If you as humankind are to be changed to the better, then you must start with yourselves as individuals and reach for the creational laws and recommendations in order to fulfill them in yourselves. And once you have fulfilled them on yourselves, it requires for you to live them outwardly into the world around you, so that your fellow human beings can take you as an example. Because truly, it is only in this kind and wise that a change to the better can come about in a greater and great extent. 15. At the same time, it is not to be assumed that you as human beings could only be altered in whole or in part in your inner nature solely through the words of your fellow human beings, because none amongst you can change another in any wise, since it is only the human being in question who can do this through his or her own endeavors, if they require a change of the inner nature and also want this. 16. Therefore, if there is to be an end to all the wars and crimes, the terrorism and hatred of all kinds, the jealousy and the criminality as well as the murdering and torture, the altercations, the outbreaks of anger and rage, and also an end to the acts of gewalt of all kinds, the cheating and thievery, the human trafficking and the pathological cravings and vices and other terrible things of all kinds. then it is the individual who is called upon, and indeed in such a wise that individuals must first bring under control within themselves all the terrible things and their baleful thoughts and feelings, and clear them up, in order to lead their lives in fairness and in full responsibility and conscientiousness. 17. However, what you are looking for with regard to the indescribable, which stands as true might over yourselves and over all existence, and to which you give 1,000 names, which, however, you name God in your delusion of belief, is truthfully the creation with its laws and recommendations, and you have always searched for these since time immemorial without being able to find them, because false prophets have guided you with false teachings into the unreal and to a belief in gods and tin gods, and thus into religious aberration and confusion. 18. The truthfully prophets, however, who brought you the real truth, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, it is those whom you have persecuted at all times, and even to the present day, seeking to kill them. And you have cursed their teaching and calumniated their signs, their evidence which they gave to you as being magic and the work of the devil. 19. And it is mainly your servants of God's, your priests and the like, who in no wise acknowledge and follow the truthfully teaching of the prophets, because they only acknowledge their teachings of God's and curse the truth of the teaching of the prophets, which is against the godly servile and irrational teachings, and does not proclaim any godly ideals, such as the teachings of God's do, which could not be more confusing and more false. 20. And because the servants of God's believe and represent their false teachings of their false prophets and falsifiers of scrolls, therefore they, in their religiously deluded belief, invent lies about ideals that are far removed from reality, as well as about redeemers and paradises in godly heavens, which are devoid of all reality. 21. The worshippers of gods are directed towards religious belief forms thought up by you human beings which are devoid of all reality and contradict and derisively mock all the truth of the creation and of its laws and recommendations, which inevitably leads to differences in the understanding and following of the belief forms through the believers, with the effect that every belief will inevitably lead to the Gewaltsamkeit in itself, as well as to the extensive Gewaltsamkeit amongst all you human beings of earth. 22. In the continuous battle which you call life, you attempt to create a codex of behavior which shall correspond to your society, in which you grew up, and indeed irrespective of whether this is a so-called unfree or free society. 23. Fundamentally, you only accept a normalized life attitude of your belief as a constituent part of your traditions and customs, which proceed from out of your cults, religions, and sects, and so you always look for a godhead invented through you human beings who supposedly says to you what things you shall do that are rightful or shall leave that are unrightful. 24. You look to your godhead or to your tin god to see what they shall say to you, what your right or wrong behavior shall be, and what your right thoughts and feelings shall be. And you then believe your priests and your other worshippers of gods, worshippers of tin gods who fabulate away or consciously lie about what their deity or their tin god have given as rules. Although neither an invented god nor tin god can give any rules of behavior or any other rules and regulations of any kind, because they do not exist. 25. You, however, who are searching for the truth of all truth, you fall prey to the belief in your gods and tin gods and the false assertions and irrational teachings of the priests. Therefore you direct yourselves according to the supposed norms of the supposed gods and tin gods, through which your behavior as well as your thoughts and feelings become mechanical in terms of belief or religion, and your reactions become automatic due to being bound by belief, as a result of which you are no longer capable of free thoughts and feelings because they are only controlled through the belief and the religion. 26. If you would direct your interest to this fact, then you would recognize the truth and turn away from the belief and from the religions. But as you are captured in yourselves through your own religious belief, you are unable to break through your own prison and cannot get through to the outside in order to experience the effective truth of all truth, as is given through the creation and its laws and recommendations. 27. Truly, for thousands of years, you human beings of earth have been patronized through your teachers who have been misguiding you, and through your authorities with false teachings and through false prophets, as well as through many of your fellow human beings who have raised themselves to gods or representatives of gods, to godly ambassadors as well as to leaders of religions and sects, and have written scripts and books about their irrational and false teachings. 28. And for thousands of years, you have been believing these deceivers and charlatans, the false prophets, whereas you have been insulting the true prophets by calling them liars, calumniating them, persecuting them, and striving to kill them. 29. You believe the charlatans and deceivers, the false prophets as well as their priests and other servants of God's, and you expect from them that they can reveal everything to you which is the truthfully truth, and what is hidden behind the truthfully laws and recommendations of the life. 30. They, however, cannot give you any answer to this, because their knowledge is not built up on the creational truth, but rather on an unreal belief in a Godhead or in 10 gods and their cults and rites. 31. You, however, you are satisfied with their false presentations and explanations, and you willingly let yourselves be guided into the unreal, and indeed without you yourselves searching for the fundamental truth of the life, because you are captured in a religious belief, which is your belief of the servitude. 32. Truly, you only live according to the misguiding words of your priests, who maintain that they are repeating the words of their God, which, however, truthfully does not exist, and as an imaginary unreality, has neither the power to do good or evil. 33. And since you only live according to the misguiding and false words of your priests and supposed gods and 10 gods, therefore your life is hollow and empty. 34. And because you do not determine over yourselves, but let yourselves be determined through your belief in imaginary gods and 10 gods, as well as through their priests and other worshippers of gods and worshippers of 10 gods, therefore you are no more than human beings at second hand, because you only take from what is prescribed to you through the belief and what is said to you through the priests and worshippers of gods as well as worshippers of 10 gods, without you truthfully deciding for yourselves. 35. You are not using your intellect and your rationality in order to fathom out the truthfully truth of the life through your own thoughts and feelings and to find it in the creational laws and recommendations, as they are manifoldly also recognizable in the free nature. 36. And by leading your life in your belief in gods and 10 gods, you do not let any true control prevail over yourselves and your doing as well as over your thoughts, feelings, and deeds. Rather, you let yourselves be led simply uncontrolled through your intentions and inclinations as well as through your lustfulnesses and attitudes, as well as through what is forcefully imposed upon you, though the circumstances, and through your fellow human beings or through the environment. 37. Therefore, you are not the result of yourselves, but rather the result of many and manifold influences that continuously break in upon you, in particular influences that result out of your belief in your invented gods and 10 gods. 38. In you, there is only the long-standing belief in your deities and 10 gods, however nothing new, nothing that you have discovered yourselves, and nothing that you discover yourselves, because you are truly empty and hollow with regard to the truthfully knowledge about the reality of the creation and of its laws and recommendations. Therefore, there is nothing original and nothing primeval in you, only belief in a fabulated god or 10 god. 39. Truly, since time immemorial, since the entire religious past, you human beings of earth have been irrationally taught and assured through religious or sectarian teachers, and you continue to be taught irrationally and assured that you, providing you undertake cult activities such as rites and sacrifices, as well as repeating certain prayers or mantras, will receive enlightenment and a propitious existence. 40. And it has been and is said to you that it is necessary that you shall suppress your needs and wishes, and that you shall adapt yourselves to certain norms and control your thoughts, as well as purify your passions, and raise them into higher levels, so you shall be God-pleasing. 41. And furthermore, it has been and continues to be said to you through the religions that you shall restrain your drives and refrain from sexual debaucheries, so that your spirit and your body will be purified. 42. And, as has been and continues to be religiously taught to you, it is only when your spirit and body are sufficiently tortured that you shall find a higher life, which is only to be found beyond the meaningless earthly life. 43. And truly, so-called religious human beings amongst you, numbering in the millions, have done in this wise over the past hundreds and thousands of years, and many amongst you human beings of earth still do so equally today, however without success as always since time immemorial. 44. as your forefathers before you. You go into the seclusion, into monasteries, into the quiet cell, into the mountains, into the forest, into a cave, into the desert, or you go begging through the world, alone or in groups, in order to force your consciousness, erroneously called spirit, to join into a belief and to adapt itself to an unreality thought up through you human beings. 45. But, truly, through that you are merely going even more astray in the irrational teachings and in the belief in gods and tin gods and the like, because the more you do this, the deeper you fall into the darkness of the not knowing and the untruth. 46. Consider human beings of earth. What you are doing in this wise makes you into tormented human beings with a broken consciousness, broken thoughts and feelings, and a broken psyche. 47. In this wise, you truly cannot escape from the tumult of the world happenings, even if you strive to do so, because if you attempt to abdicate the outside world through such discipline, and through that to adapt yourselves to your belief and its requirements and expectations, then you will only be insensitive against the truth and reality. And furthermore, no matter how long you may strive and struggle, you will only ever find what corresponds to your misguided thoughts and feelings and, therefore, to your delusions. 48. Truthfully, a completely different way must be taken if you want to find and discover those things on the other side of the tumult of the world, and of the angstful and ambitious, fear-filled, as well as guiltful and nervous life which contain higher values, which, however, has nothing to do with illusory enlightenments and fabulated, godly spheres and unrealities of being, but rather solely and alone with the effective truth of reality. 49. Fundamentally, you human beings of earth must go into yourselves in order to acquire everything in yourselves by you creating true love in yourselves as well as inner peace, inner freedom, and harmony. 50. If, in doing so, you give up all lovelessness, all unpeace as well as all disharmony and unfreedom by which you are bound, and if you practice the status of equalizedness and neutrality in yourselves, then over the course of time, an inner blossoming of that inner love and beauty will arise which opens the entire life in full magnificence. 51. You, however, human beings of earth, you are in reality doing precisely the opposite, and therefore everything in order to be narrow-minded, loveless, inferior, and unsignificant. 52. If you are fathoming out your true core, if you are peeling away layer by layer, then you take your time in doing so, although you are filled with expectations that you will find goodness in yourselves, as you also hope that the next morning or your next life will bring good things for you. But when you then finally reach the center of the core of your inner nature, then you discover with dread that there is nothing in there but emptiness or rubbish, because you could not put anything valueful into it since your consciousness has been left dormant, and you have made your thoughts and feelings blunt, incapable, and unconcerned through a belief in a god or tin god. 53. But it is only when this discovery has been made that you ask yourselves whether there might not be a different way leading to the effective truth rather than the belief in a god or tin god, so that you can nevertheless still break through from the center of your inner nature to the real truth. 54. Unfortunately, you and the bulk of the world accept and follow the traditional way, which is that of the religious belief in a god or tin god, because of which the true reality is not recognized. 55. If you human beings of earth honestly fathom out the truthfully cause of the chaos in yourselves, then you will recognize that this cause is the search for a false reality which has been promised to you by false prophets and false teachers, as well as by priests and other servants of gods and servants of tin gods since time immemorial. 56. Therefore, you mechanically follow the irrational teachings which assure you a beneficial spiritual life, but you can never achieve this because you do not turn to the creational truth of all truth, but instead only ever to a religious belief in an invented god or tin god which are without energy or power. 57. Truly, you human beings of earth, if you consider the highest peculiarity that you oppose any religious, sectarian, political, or private tyranny, and any dictatorship or any other power if it is directed against you yourselves and you become aware of it, whereas inwardly you accept the authority, tyranny, and dictatorship of another if it is directed against one or more of you human beings or against an entire people. Truly, your consciousness and your behavior are also confused in this direction because you are not capable of clear intellect and also not of clear rationality. 58. It is also peculiar if you repudiate, and not intellectually but rather in reality, the so-called spiritual authority, and therefore also the religious belief, as well as the dogmas, rituals, ceremonies, and other cult activities, so that you then suddenly stand alone amongst all the religious believers who regard you as ones who have got very badly out of the control of the good human nature and are outcasts, because of which you firstly find yourselves in conflict with the believers and, secondly, also with the priests and other higher worshippers of gods and tin gods, and further also with society itself. 59. If you distance yourself from the religious belief, then you are ones who have got very badly out of the control of the good human nature, outcasts or godless ones in the eyes of the society, and therefore human beings to whom no more esteem is shown. Nevertheless, also this is no stumbling block for you to continue wallowing in the false religious belief rather than turning to the effective and real truth of all truth, to the truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations. 60. However, you want to be esteemed human beings in the society, but through this you cannot find the way to the real truth of the creational laws and recommendations, and it is also impossible for you to come nearer to the endless and unmeasurable reality. 61. You cowardly accept the truth unknowledge against the truthly truth of all truth of the creation and of its laws and recommendations, in order to have a certain standing in the society and to profit from this standing in one or another kind and wise. 62. Truly, you are ruled by cowardice, and you bow down in anxiety and fear of the harsh rule of religion, whatever it may be, and indeed only because you, in your pusillanimousness and chicken-heartedness, are unable to bring forth the courage to be yourselves, to promote in yourselves your own thoughts of the rationality and intellect in order to let the effective truth be granted to yourselves, and to turn away from the untruth of the religious belief in a godhead or in a tin god. 63. But truly, you human beings of earth, you are peculiar, because if you have begun to turn away from the traditional way of the religious belief and therefore to negate all the false things, then you create a reaction out of this refusal of the God-related or tin God-bound religiosity. And this reaction is based on you acquiring another pattern of a god or tin god, and falling prey to another religious or sectarian belief which holds you just as tightly with its greedy clutches as the belief that you previously had and from which you have turned away. Therefore, you, human beings of earth, simply turn from one religious belief to the next, without thereby reaching the way of the real truth of all truth, namely to the effective truth of the creation and of its laws and recommendations. 64. If you turn away from a religious belief in a godhead or in a tin god or the like, no matter of what kind, because your intellect and your rationality tell you that it is good and right, then you nevertheless do not get any further and do not find the truthly truth if you make nothing out of the rejection of the belief, but simply turn to another belief. 65. However, if you reject the religious belief in a god or tin god, in a human being who has elevated himself or herself into a god or god representative, in saints, angels, and demons, because you recognize that each religious or other belief is merely made out of a blunt consciousness. And if you understand the immaturity of the social and religious accords and rules of conduct and repudiate these on the basis of deep insight, because you are continuously becoming freer in yourselves, when you turn to the real truth, then on the one hand you will be free of the uncalmness in yourselves, whereas on the other hand you will bring forth uncalmness amongst your fellow human beings, because you are no longer of their enslaving religious belief. 66. You human beings of earth, however, who free yourselves from your religious belief in a god or tin god, in a human being who has raised himself or herself up to the representative of God, and from the belief in saints, angels, demons, or also from the human idols of all kinds, and who finally become yourselves and also carry all the responsibility for yourselves, you will escape out of the greedy clutches of the traditional characterlessness and indecency which are taught to you by the society and by the religions, and which are characterlessly presented as honorableness. 67. And when you get this far, then you will discover that you must no longer search for the effective truth of all truth, because searching is fundamentally wrong, since this is the equivalent to a hunt for something undeterminate, which is never found because it is not known and also cannot be found. 68. Therefore, it is necessary to learn, not to search, but rather to use rationality and intellect in order to recognize the truthly truth of all truth there, where it actually is, and no actual searching is required for this, but only a perception of all things that go on, take place and move around you human beings of earth. Because the modes of functioning of the creational laws and recommendations, and therefore the effective truth, are to be recognized therein, which only require the intellect and rationality, and the to-be-created will for it to be understood and followed. 69. The truthly truth can be perceived and recognized in the free nature all around. So, how it manifests itself as the effects of the creational laws and recommendations in all and everything, and therefore also in you human beings yourselves as well as in every plant and in every life form, and equally so in the elements of earth and in the entire universe, in the stars, the planets, the meteors, the shooting stars and the comets, and nebulae. 70. Truly, the effective truth that lies in the creational laws and recommendations as well as in the creation itself can never be shown as such through priests, books, philosophers, servants of gods, redeemers, prophets, ideologues, or other human beings, just as the questions about it cannot be either. 71. However, it is a fact that the mode of functioning of the truth, and therefore also the modes of functioning of the creational laws and recommendations can be named, although this does not belong in the explanation domain of those who place a god above themselves and pray to it, just as all those caught up in religion of any kind do, such as priests, servants of gods, philosophers, redeemers, and the like who stay far away from the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, and therefore far from the teaching of the prophets, in which everything that is known with regard to the truthly truth and mode of functioning of the creational laws and recommendations is proclaimed. 72. And the teaching of the prophets, the goblet of the truth, only names the facts of the truth which run through the entire life and form the guidelines of the existence, which you human beings of earth shall follow, so that you may lead a good and life-pleasing existence, valuing and esteeming it highly. 73. The teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life of the true prophets teaches you in accordance with the cognitions proceeding out of the creational laws and recommendations. All those things that you require for a true and fair, as well as conscientious and responsible life conduct, so that true love and harmony may exist in you yourselves as well as amongst your entire humankind, as well as truthfully freedom and all-embracing peace. 74. And if you follow the teaching, the goblet of the truth, the teaching of the prophets, and if you learn everything which it imparts you, then you shall not simply accept everything as given, but rather use it in order to fathom it out and to work it out in yourselves, so that you may find the real truth out of and in everything, and become knowing and wise in yourselves by understanding and following the truth that you have found in yourselves. 75. Consider also, you human beings of earth, only what you have created in yourselves through hard working out and truth-finding through the explanations and guidance of the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, and all that which you perceive in the free nature all around in all things and life forms and recognize as effects of the creational laws and recommendations. Can you find in yourselves as effective truth if you consciously and honestly strive to do so? 76. Therefore, it is a fact that no one can answer the question about the truthly truth for you themselves, not even the true prophets, because these can only guide you in the explanations of the truth as well as the modes of functioning of the creational laws and recommendations. Whereas you can only find the truth for this in yourselves if you think through everything neutrally in yourselves and find the result of the truth therein. 77. But consider when you want to find the truth in yourselves, and this is the only way to the truthly truth, then you shall not be immature in yourselves, and you must therefore know yourselves so that you can understand yourselves, which in turn must be obtained through self-cognition. 78. If, therefore, you turn to the teaching of the prophets, then you do not need to search for any kind of higher things or for redemption, or for any other thing based in irrational teachings, but solely and exclusively learn out of the teaching only those things which lead you to the self-cognition and to your own self, and to all those characterly and virtuous values through which you can raise yourselves up to the being human in the real and true sense. and it is only once you have acquired certain values in this regard and have found your own self that you shall turn to those things of the teaching through which you make valueful perceptions and deeper cognitions and cognizances, as well as win deeper knowledge and practical experience which you feel is living experience and can use as wisdom. 79. And if you ask yourselves what your self is, then you must fathom your inner nature and its individuality in order to be able to observe that there is a great difference between this individuality, i.e., the character of your inner nature and you human beings as such, i.e., as individuums. 80. You human beings as individuums with your own will and your own decisions are more or less free, not bound to one place, and you can be anywhere you like and love, such as in a place in a country, or you can belong to a quite distinct society, culture, and religion, can dedicate yourselves to your activity, and use everything which is of material kind, and in this wise determines your life as a human being. However, your individuality is bound as character in your nature as a local oneness, and gives expression of itself with its especialness, peculiarities as well as with the character, the virtues, and with the personality, etc. 81. And your deeds as an individuum, as a human being, are only partly related to the whole and broad life area, which not only includes the human being as an individuum with his or her free choice of the dwelling, society, culture, and religion, or his or her mode of thinking, but also the individual which has inherent in itself the especialness, character, virtues, and personality, and, of course, also the human and the being human in the real and true sense. What arises out of this is that individuum and individuality are two fundamentally different values which are often confounded with each other and wrongly explained by you human beings of Earth. 82. Therefore, in this connection, it is always necessary to take the whole into account. Therefore, it is not possible to speak of only one part, because in truth it is always a matter of the completeness of you human beings, namely the individuum and the individuality, which are decisive with regard to the being human in the real and true sense. And because only the completeness of individuum and individuality is important, out of this it also follows that both parts are of equal importance and of equal value. Therefore, there is no smaller and larger part, and therefore it is wrong to teach that a smaller and a larger part arise with regard to the individuality and the individuum, meaning that the larger cannot be found in the smaller, and the smaller cannot be found in the larger, because truthfully, both parts of the wholeness individuum and individuality are of equal value, just as the one part draws benefit from the other. Therefore, it is necessary to remember always to talk about the whole and not about a part, and that the same values are found in both parts, but are simply of a different kind in their form, namely as material and intrinsic, i.e. as individuum-based and individual. 83. As individuum, you human beings of Earth are constrained creatures who bring misery on yourselves and are disappointed as well as still powerless with regard to the consciousness and of little significant importance, who satisfy yourselves with your false religious belief and your invented little gods and tin gods and images, and live according to your old confused and irrational traditions. Whereas you could, however, live as true human beings if you built up your inner nature, your individuality, in a truthfully wise according to the creational laws and recommendations, and would transfer this to your entire life in yourselves and outside of yourselves. In doing so, you would then also be true human beings in humaneness, in which you would participate in the well-being, in all affliction, in the misery and confusion of your entire earthly humankind. 84. But truly, you human beings of Earth, you have remained captives of yourselves and of your traditions for many thousands and even millions of years, traditions which you have learned and followed through lies and deceptions of your fellow human beings who invented gods and tin gods and more of the same with fantasy or with a confused consciousness. And you have accepted these gods and tin gods and have since then worshipped them and begged them for help. However, they can never give you anything because they are only imaginary and powerless figures of fantasy. 85. And false duties have been imposed upon you through the inventors of the fantasy forms, God and tin god, and false prophets have given false teachings as well as false requirements of the supposed gods and tin gods, the fulfillment of which has been imposed upon you as a duty, out of which, however, only terribleness arose, which came entirely upon your whole humankind in the form of greed and envy, jealousy, hatred, anxiety, fear and despair, aggression, pathological craving for revenge. Lustfulness is pathological craving for retaliation, which has, through getting very badly out of the control of the good human nature, entirely turned into war, terror, pathological craving for might, as well as religious fanaticism, and into the religious belief delusion from which there is no rescue. 86. Sometimes, however, you also feel joy, love, and inclination in yourselves, but you are also doubtful in this, and therefore an exceedingly peculiar mixture of love and hatred, of jealousy and inclination, of forbearance and unforbearance, of honesty and unhonesty, as well as of kind-heartedness and evil, also of pathological craving for revenge and reconciliation, of peaceableness and peacelessness, and of acting with Gewalt and charity, etc. 87. Truly, as far as technology is concerned, human beings of Earth have made great progress. From the club to the atom bomb, and from the wheelless cart to space rockets, you have pushed ahead with your progress. But in your inner nature, in your individuality, you have not developed greatly as an individuum, as a human being, but have negatively changed yourselves even further, by means of which you have created the entire anonymous structure of the society throughout the world. 88. When you look at and consider the external social structure, then you see the result of your inner psychological structure, as is given in your inner nature, in your individuality, which you carry in you as an individuum, as a human being, as the expression of your attitude, because as an individuum you use the result of the entire practical experiences, of the entire knowledge and of all things in order to form your individual, i.e. natural behavior, as you have done already since time immemorial, which is why you carry therewith the entire past in your inner nature, i.e. in your individuality. 89. You as human beings, as individuums, are the expression which carries your entire humankind in it as individuality, as an inner nature, because it is in the inner nature, in the individuality, that everything has been formed since time immemorial, and namely the entire sorrowful and inadequate evolution history, through the wrong use of the consciousness and of the thoughts and feelings, through which the inner nature, the individuality, has been impaired and deformed, and this is transferred to the outside as well, to you human beings as individuums. 90. Pay attention to what is happening in yourselves, in your inner nature, i.e. in your individuality, as well as what you as a human being, individuum, are doing outwardly, and what is generally taking place in your outer world in which you live, and which is a culture of competition without parallel, which only demands might, possessions and riches, pleasure, influence, position, rank and name, as well as prestige, and everything that stands somehow or other in material connection. 91. And look at and consider everything of which you are proud and which you vehemently fight for. Look at and consider, however, also your relationships that you lead, which are full of conflicts and jealousy, as well as full of hatred, ausgeartet passion, and fanaticism, out of which brutality results, as well as strife, terror, murder, and manslaughter, and war. 92. Truly, that is your life, human beings of Earth, as you have known it since time immemorial, because you do not understand the truth of the creational laws and recommendations, and you are incapable of truly understanding and controlling the gigantic struggle of the life. 93. Truly, hatred and strife, jealousy, greed for might, belief and worshipping gods, brutality, murder and manslaughter, endless wars and other terror as well as torture, missing interhuman relationships, greed, vice, and all kinds of pathological cravings are things which you undertake to an excessive extent, and this extensive domain of the evil and Ausartung is everything that you know, naturally. You are afraid of all this, and you search for hidden possibilities to escape all these terrible things, but you do not succeed because you only turn to your material life and to all its things, and however not to the truthfully truth of all truth, which is only to be found in the creational laws and recommendations, but which is unknown to you, however. 94. Therefore you are afraid of the unknown, of the life and of the death, and of everything that lies behind the next morning and in the near and far future. But you are also afraid of what is known to you, which the present existence brings you, And that is truly your life in which there is no confidence for you, if you do not finally bethink yourselves in order to turn to the truthfully truth of all truth, as is taught to you through the creational laws and recommendations, explained through the true prophets in the book Goblet of the Truth, the teaching of the prophets, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life. 95. Human beings of Earth. Consider the truthfully truth of all truth and learn it, so that you recognize that all religions and all their terms of any kind, as well as all philosophies, ideologies, and all forms of the religious belief in gods and tin gods, as well as their like, are nothing more than a cowardly flight from the true reality, and therefore from that which is truthfully and uncontrovertible. And through the cowardly flight from the real truth and the effective reality, which are pre-given, through the creational laws and recommendations, you have brought wars and all kinds of terribleness over your world and humankind. 96. You have created vast changes in your world and in your humankind since time immemorial and up into the present time, although the majority of all these upheavals have been and are also in the present time of an extremely negative and evil nature, and indeed through your hatred that you bear towards your fellow human beings because you do not like their nose, their religion, or their strangeness, or whatever else, through which you see yourselves incited to practice jealousy. Take the first opportunity to wage wars and other terror, start reformations, revolutions, and bloody demonstrations and riots. 97. And you create ideologies, religions, sects, laws, regulations, and ordinances which are unworthy of you human beings and which unavoidably lead to confusion and wars, because they are laws, regulations, and ordinances which take from you human beings the dignity, peace, freedom, and harmony in every wise, and only bring forth more and more terrible things amongst you, instead of them being able to change you as individuals and as a whole society fundamentally to the better. 98. As human beings, which you are, you live in a monstrous world that you have created with ugly laws, ordinances, and regulations, etc., that are directed towards a society of the brutality, of the anxiety and fear, of the terror, of the acts of Gewalt, and of the unhonest competition. And this monstrous world with you, as humankind, cannot come to rest and cannot become a world of love, peace, and harmony, as well as of true freedom, for as long as you do not form everything amply to the good and according to the creational laws and recommendations, and indeed not only as an imagination and as a hope, but in truth and reality. 99. And only if you change yourselves in truth and reality to the good and better, and thereby your consciousness awakes to a new freshness, reforms itself, and becomes pure, will it be possible for you to bring forth an entirely different and valuable world in which you then live in a true paradise, and you feel well, and you are filled with love and are also surrounded by it, as also peace. Freedom and harmony will prevail in and outside you. 100. However, this can only happen if every single one of you human beings of Earth, as a single individuum, becomes conscious of the important fact and acts according to it, namely that you are yourselves as fully all around responsible as individuals for the entire status of your own inner nature, i.e. your individuality, as well as for the evolution of your consciousness, and with regard to your actions and efforts, as each individual of you is also fully and completely responsible for the status of the world in its entirety, irrespective of where you may live and to which social class, religion, or sect, which people, which culture, which philosophy or ideology you belong to as individuals.